The next day, early in the morning, while the sun was illuminating everything, Luang approached the window and began to observe the landscape with a cheerful smile. Our boy activated his mental power, making the liquid inside the bucket gradually start to float. Luang extended his hand and all the liquid started to float in the air. He began to observe it, and his eyes filled with determination. With a smile, he decided to try it. He opened his mouth, and the liquid began to enter his mouth. In an instant, Luang drank all the liquid. Behind him was the bucket. Our boy's attention was fixed on it, with a surprised expression. He realized that this high-purity water was really good. He began to imagine a beautiful waterfall in the jungle. You see, this was the spiritual water with the highest purity in the world, coming from the depths of the northern mountain range of the Lion Kingdom. After being extracted, it had to go through more than 100 complex processes for its refinement. Just one bucket of this water could cost billions. Luang's eyes expanded with confidence. He had been submerged in the tube of spiritual marrow liquid for more than a year without ingesting any food, which in a certain sense could also be considered a kind of fasting. He could not contain himself any longer and snapped his fingers. Some elegant waiters carrying delicious meat dishes opened the door and began to enter one after another. They filled Luang's table with delicious dishes of all kinds, from meat to quinoa. Our boy grabbed the fork and knife, and his gaze fixed on the food. His mouth watered, as eating meat always made him feel good. Our boy put down the fork and knife, grabbed a steak with his hands and took a bite. His eyes closed and a pleasant smile appeared on his face. These days his mouth had been so tasteless that even his taste buds had forgotten what flavor was. Just then, a sexy woman holding a wooden chest entered the room. She was a blonde woman with green eyes. She approached Luang and, with a kind smile, mentioned that the divine seal wanted to give him this chest. Luang, who was absorbed in eating, came out of his trance, turned toward her, and, upon seeing the chest, his eyes widened in surprise and curiosity. The woman opened the chest. Inside were energy crystals that were shining intensely due to their high purity. She revealed that there were a total of 436 G. Despite feeling somewhat surprised, Luang remained calm, closed his eyes, and wiped the food remnants from his mouth with the help of a napkin. With a tranquil expression, he realized that Harold had been very generous. In an instant he finished all the food, stood up, turned his back to the woman, and, while walking away, asked the woman to let him know the day Harold was ready to leave. The woman closed her eyes, placed her hands over her abdomen, bowed her head before Luang as a sign of respect, and with a smile, bid farewell to the great martial saint. Somewhere in the central military district of the Dragon Kingdom, there were large and luxurious skyscrapers, and one of them was the army's conference building. Inside were all the marshals of the Dragon Kingdom. The Eastern Marshal, who was holding a report, began to look at the others, and his eyes widened with happiness. With a joyful expression, he informed them that, according to the latest reliable news, Luang had fully recovered and returned. Upon hearing this, the Southern Marshal's eyes also filled with happiness. He began to observe the Eastern Marshal and couldn't help but smile. The conference became curious and asked if they could now contact Luang. With a serious gaze, the Marshal of the East explained that they could not for the moment. Only Luang had been communicating with them unilaterally, and by tracking the source of the signal, it could be determined that he was approximately near the ocean in the southern part of the Eagle Kingdom. The eyes of the Marshal of the Central District filled with tranquility. He left the report on the table, intertwined his hands, and with a smile decided not to speak further on the matter and move on to the next topic. He asked if they should continue sending representatives to the Great World Masters Tournament. The attention of the Marshal of the East fixed on him, and his eyes began to shine with rage. In previous years, the army sent elite warriors to participate in the great competition with the goal of fostering the birth of a powerful martial saint, level warrior. Although the army suffered losses, the warriors continued to participate enthusiastically. But now that Luang existed, who was destined to become the future martial saint of the army, It was no longer necessary to take part in this bloody competition. The Marshal of the West clenched his fist, and with a furious expression made it clear that they had to participate, since there was no reason not to do so. According to him, they had to give everything to win. The Marshal of the North exploded with fury, and with a gaze full of rage, reminded them that for them, the World Masters Tournament was a field for testing and competition. But in the eyes of the Martial Saint, it was actually a stage for dispute over energy crystal distribution. The Marshal of the South also clenched his fists, and his eyes widened with seriousness. With a furious gaze, he revealed that in the past, the army always fought for the interests of the three martial saints of the Dragon Kingdom. Now that their opportunity had arrived, how could they not fight for it? The gaze full of determination, the Marshal of the Central District mentioned that the god of the army's future was about to return, bringing back the glory they had not seen in more than 200 years. He decided to prepare him a great celebratory gift. They decided to go out and celebrate the return of the god of war with a great victory. A few hours later, dusk fell, and in the middle of the city stood the Tower of Martial Saint. Inside was the Martial Saint himself, with his arms behind his back as he contemplated the views of the city. A ninja arrived at the tower, knelt before him, and reminded him that only 15 days remained until the Great World Tournament of Masters began, asking if he was ready to depart. The Martial Saint began to gaze towards the ground and nodded his head. The ninja, who was holding some reports in his hands, stood up and with a serious voice mentioned that this was the most recent information about that person. This caught the attention of the Martial Saint, who became curious and gave the order for the ninja to withdraw. The ninja handed over the information, and with a leap, he left the tower. He turned toward the tower, clenched his fists, and while falling to the ground, reported that the subordinate of the Martial Saint was withdrawing. The Martial Saint took one of the reports, where a photo of Luang clenching his fist appeared, and he began to observe our boy in silence. He was Jangu. His gaze fixed on the reports, and his eyes began to shine. He started touching his beard and couldn't help but feel surprised to see that Luang was really not dead, knowing that he would soon return. Our boy, who had been defeated, had been reborn and was about to reach the level of Martial Saint, read carefully. His eyes widened in surprise upon seeing that with a level 8 body, he had seriously injured Martial Saint Exia Jai. Now, Luang could be called an unparalleled genius in history. Tanjiang couldn't help but think that he had underestimated him. His eyes began to shine with rage as he started to regret it. But then he closed his eyes and coldly threw the reports out the window, thinking that there was nothing left to regret. His body began to release a powerful martial energy, and his eyes filled with determination. According to him, Exia Jai was nothing more than a useless old man, while he had reached the level of Grandmaster at 42 years old. By 80, he had managed to become a martial saint. His manifestation had reached a size of 1,000 meters, surpassing Exia Jai hundreds of times. In a life-or-death confrontation, he would behead him in less than 5 moves. He used his power and launched a powerful blast of blue energy into the sky. Then, evil energy began to manifest at one single point. Jangu crossed his arms behind his back and began observing. His martial will was like a golden sword capable of destroying everything. No matter how talented or monstrous Luang was, compared to him, he was nothing. His martial will transformed into a weapon, and Jangu grabbed it with his hand. His eyes began to shine with confidence, and with a smile he made it clear that he was going to be the first to leave this planet. His eyes filled with rage, and he used the celestial slash, forcefully swinging his weapon made of martial will. The attack was so powerful that it cut through the atmosphere and space. Somewhere else on the planet, there were some hot springs, far from the city. While a man with purple hair was enjoying a bath, someone wearing boots approached him from behind. It was night, and the moon was high in the sky. She was a woman with purple hair, dressed as a ninja and wearing a mask. She approached and, with a curious gaze, asked if Exia Jai was going to the World Masters tournament. Upon hearing this, Exia Jai's widened in fury. He turned around and, with an enraged gaze, asked if she thought that in this state he could go to the World Masters tournament. The woman turned her back on him and, with a calm gaze, adjusted her hood. She mentioned that she had only asked out of habit. For her, this was a shame because from now on, and for many years, he would not have the right to receive energy crystals. Exia Jai could not help but clench his fists and get angry. He began to stare at her and gave her the order to make sure to exchange with the guides for the medicine to heal his martial soul. Once he had it, he was going to pay her twice the price. The woman turned her back on him, closed her eyes, and asked him to calm down, as it was a unique opportunity. Even if he forgot about it, she would never forget it. Exia Jai lost his composure and struck the water forcefully. As long as Jangu could get him 2 bottles of soul-nourishing elixir, he would be able to recover at least 80 of his strength in 3 years. Then he would restore the foundation of the Extreme Martial Arts Academy and gradually accumulate his power. He could not help but curse Luang. His eyes widened with fear and rage as he knew that Luang was not dead, and sooner or later he would come looking for him. He had to think of a strategy, and if he had no other option, he would do whatever was necessary to obtain the protection of Lai Jinu and Tan Zhang, since no matter how strong Luang was, he would not be able to kill him while under the protection of 2 level 9 martial saints. Then, something caught Exia Jai's attention, and his mind filled with terror. Without hesitating for even a second, he plunged into the water, thinking there was no way Luang could kill him. The World Masters Tournament, held once every 10 years, was about to begin. Powerful martial warriors from all nations on the blue planet were preparing. All the powerful forces were in motion, and dominant factions from different regions were heading toward the battlefield. Those few who stood at the pinnacle of humanity had also begun to mobilize. This was the greatest event in the martial world. It was daytime, and the sky was clear. It was a splendid day on the island of the Golden Ring. This event in the martial world was the gathering of gods among men. Martial Saint Harold and his men, who wore elegant suits, set out. Harold, who was at the front of everyone with a determined gaze, thought that victory this time was going to be theirs.